Good evening, everyone, or good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Ketaki Verma, and I lead public programs at the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore. And I'm delighted to have you all join us for the first in our new monthly series of talks, A Closer Look, which features artists, curators, and art historians as they delve into their research into the visual cultures of South Asia. We're so happy to be launching this series with the incredible Dr. Laura Weinstein, who is the Ananda Kumaraswamy Curator of South Asian and Islamic Art at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Laura will unpack an ongoing exhibition at the MFA called Divine Color Hindu Prints from Modern Bengal, which explores the origins and impact of popular devotional art, known colloquially as calendar art, that was made through lithographic printing in the 19th and early 20th century Calcutta, now Kolkata. These vibrant and accessible mass produced images brought the divine into everyday life, offering devotees new ways to engage with their gods and reshaping spiritual experiences in colonial India. In this talk, which is such a treat for those of us who can't see the exhibition in person, Laura will introduce us to the beautiful objects in the exhibition, focusing on their material and meaning within the historical context of Calcutta and the anti colonial movement as well. Towards the latter half of her presentation, she will be joined by her collaborator Yousuf Saeed, an independent filmmaker, author, and archivist based in New Delhi, India. Thank you, Laura and Yousuf, for joining us this evening. There is a link with more information about the exhibition and the full bios of our panelists in the chat box. Before I hand over to you, Laura, some housekeeping. The presentation will run for 40 minutes, after which we will open for questions from the audience. Please keep putting your questions in the Q&A box throughout the program, not the chat box. And thank you all once again for being here. And over to you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Ketaki, and thank you everybody from the MAP team. It is such a pleasure to be able to share this exhibition with you all today. I am hopeful that some of you will have a chance to be in Boston, but if not, this will give you a little bit of a taste of what the exhibition that we've put together is like. And with that, I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I'm going to launch right into this because I have a lot that I want to share today. So first of all, just a quick note. So the exhibition that I'm going to speak with you about today is open in Boston right now through May 31st. And so I will be taking you through a number of the objects and the spaces in the show. And along the way, you will see many works of art, and you can basically assume that all of the works are works in the MFA's own collection, unless I have otherwise noted it in this PowerPoint. So here I'm just showing you the entryway to our exhibition and the cover of our catalog, just as a way to introduce you. The show, as Ketaki mentioned, focuses on lithographs from Bengal made in the late 19th and early 20th century, some of the earliest examples of what we might call calendar art. These are works that have long existed in private collections in India, and in the large collections of UK museums that were formed during the colonial period. But until recently, they were not widely studied, and they weren't widely exhibited in museums really anywhere in India or elsewhere. And so they've barely been written into histories of South Asian art. And so, even though these are the origins, the antecedents of some of the most prominent types of images in India's visual landscape today, these early prints and the story of their emergence in the colonial period is really not that well known. So in our exhibition, in 6 rooms and about 110 objects, we try to introduce visitors to this material, putting them into historical and political context, examining their different aesthetic characteristics and the techniques and technology by which they were printed, looking at different ways that they were used and understood in Calcutta in their own time. and then finally exploring how they came to be tools of anti-colonial resistance. Now, I'm not going to be able to get into all of that in detail today, but I want to share a little bit, a taste of it at least. Before I do, I want to mention that we are very proud at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston that we have the oldest collection of Indian art in an American museum. We are very strong, as you can see some examples here, in Hindu and Buddhist temple sculpture and also in Rajput and Bahari, as well as Mughal painting. This collection was formed in the early 20th century and primarily by the half Sri Lankan, half English scholar Ananda Coomaraswamy. He was collecting really in the early 20th century, and then he came to Boston in 1917. And I thought it would be interesting just to mention that he was in Calcutta in the 19 teens, where he would have seen lithographs like the ones that we feature in our show. Um, what you're seeing on the right here is not a lithograph, but it is a print that shows that him in Calcutta. He's kind of depicted there on this couch chaise lounge here when you can see his name there. And he's surrounded by members of the Tagore family and Nandalal Bose. So he was there in this period, but I don't think he would have approved of these lithographic prints. He wouldn't have liked how they used a European printing technology, how they used European techniques to show kind of volume and depth. He probably would have seen them as a kind of contamination or degradation of Indian art. And while I have immense respect for this founder of the collection, I chose to work on the material because I think that their story is more than a story of loss. It's also a story of incredible ingenuity. And I thought I would paraphrase a great scholar of prints, Patricia Uberoy, who says, well, I'm paraphrasing her, but these prints represent not only surrender and collusion, but also resistance and brilliant creative agency. So with that, let's turn to the material, starting with the city of Calcutta itself. I'm thinking that this audience is probably very familiar with the central role that Calcutta played in 19th century Indian history. So we won't go into that in detail. And I think some of you will also be familiar with quote unquote company paintings, Kaligat putts, and other visual culture of this period. Probably fewer people are aware of how wide-ranging the array of devotional objects that were how wide-ranging was the array of devotional objects that were being made in different neighborhoods of 19th century Calcutta. And I think particularly few have really had access to the rich world of printed images that were made in Calcutta. So from what I'm showing you here, prints made with wood blocks and metal plates in the middle of the 19th century. These are very rare today. By some accounts, only about 200 survive. To Kaligat style printed works that are made using lithography for their outlines and details. To the earliest color lithographs made in Calcutta. These objects interest me because they're not part of one of the reasons is because they're not part of institutionalized religion, but more kind of a personalized devotional practice. And because of that, they're not highly linked to what you might call regulated priestly ritual. And so they have some unique characteristics. One of those is that they're very strongly connected to practices of ritual, poetry, song, dance that are deeply rooted in communities, community life, community practices. And the second reason is that artists who made them were able to be, and actually even like needed to be, experimental and innovative in style and technique because they were trying to sell their works. Overall, works like the ones that you're seeing on the screen have generally, I think, been overlooked by museums because they are made with relatively cheap materials. They're not for elite patrons, but we are beginning to see this change, and and our show is part of that change. So in our exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts, we start with this room that has a lot going on in it, but in the foreground of this photograph, you can see two pedestals. And these are pretty standard forms of museum display, pedestals with objects on them, sometimes covered, sometimes framed. But you can maybe see that we tried a few small changes to the standard display. So if you look on the right, you can see the pedestal has multiple levels. Some of the 2D works are installed leaning against the back of the pedestal, and objects overlap one another in a couple of cases. And our goal was to convey a couple of things. One, that these are works of art that weren't meant to be seen on the walls of a museum, but instead engaged with in an active and kind of corporeal way. Another was the idea that from family to family, from household to household, people engage with these objects, display these objects in different ways. So framed or not, leaning or pasted on the wall, combined with objects like ritual tools like lamps and bells. In our exhibition, of course, we don't have any of those ritual implements. We're not trying to kind of mimic a home shrine, but we just want to kind of gently introduce this distinctive kind of mode of use and display and differentiate it from the kinds of things you usually see in a museum, as well as the way that people engage with art in a temple kind of setting. And after this introductory space, we move into looking at 19th century Calcutta and introducing it to our visitors, many of whom will not be familiar. And we step away from devotional objects for a moment, and instead we look at printed works that speak to the presence of Europeans and Indians, European and Indian populations in the city, and the ways that their lives and views merged, clashed, overlapped in different moments and contexts. So, for example, we have this map of Calcutta, which is a lithograph made with hand-painted color, and this was produced by a French lithographer based in Calcutta in 1832. He was trained in France, but in Calcutta, he set up something called the Oriental Lithographic Press. And you can see from this map that he's focusing on kind of major British monuments, big streets like Chitpur Road and Bazaar Road, and also on recent urban improvements like canals that were dug. This map was loaned to the museum by the McLean Collection in Chicago. And it's wonderful because it shows the kind of an early moment of lithography in the city, and also it shows what the British were using lithography for. I do want to share that the McLean Collection also produced this wonderful digital interactive. The URL is at the bottom here, and I encourage you to go to this site to get to explore the map more closely. Now, another print that we have in this section, produced just a few years later, but further north in the city, is a work that shows a very different view of Calcutta society. This is a gathering hosted by a Bengali elite. And he has a number of different guests, including Europeans, who you can see sort of in the middle on the left. They seem to be watching a quote unquote nautch dance and expecting more performances by the people who are standing in the bottom right-hand corner. Between this kind of array of figures, the flowers on the table, the dogs, I think what we're looking at is a representation of the life of the famed and much mocked Bengali Babu, who was mocked for smoking and drinking and keeping courtesans and dancing girls. I mean, this is the kind of critique of his lifestyle was something that Bengali society and Bengali prints and literature was very engaged in. This critique was not coming from the British necessarily. And so I wonder if this is a print that is intended to kind of critique the conspicuous consumption that we see here. And I want to point out that at the bottom of the print in the center, we have the artist's name and address, which is showing us kind of a bit of professionalization that's happening in the making of prints in the Bengali print community. And this is a work from what's called Botala, which was this kind of northern Calcutta hub for the printing of newspapers and books and all kinds of works in the 19th century. And now let's go on and dig into the lithographs. In our next room, we really start to explore this as a method of producing devotional images in the 19th century. Lithography came to Calcutta in around 1820. And by 1850, Bengali artists were using the technology to make images of gods and goddesses, Hindu stories, often for devotional use. And you can see here that we have a table in the foreground where we show some of the materials and tools that a lithographer needs. Here is just a little bit more detail about the process. I'm showing you on the left a stone that is the key component of lithography. You draw or paint your image directly on the stone. And this is a stone that's in the MAP collection. So thank you to MAP for letting me use it. I'm not going to go into detail in the process because I have so much else that I want to cover. But basically, you paint your image directly on the stone and then use chemicals to fix the image into the stone rather than carving or anything like that. And the stones are very durable. You can print thousands of images from a single stone. Now, this was a technique that was invented in Germany in the 1790s. And then it came to Calcutta, and among the earliest artists who started using it who were making kind of devotional images were artists from the sphere of Kaligat painting. And you can see in this Annapurna Kaligat, for example, that some of the details have been made using lithographic printing. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but hopefully you can. That, for example, the leg of this throne or chair has been printed with lithography, and then the artist has gone over it with silver paint. Similarly, the dhoti worn by Shiva, this pattern of tiger skin, has been printed with lithography. And it's generally thought that using lithography this way to produce the outlines and some details was a way of speeding up production. To my knowledge, there's only one artist who's signed works like these, meaning Kaligat paintings with lithography as a kind of outline and to provide detail. And the work on the left was made by this artist, Becharam Das Datta. His signature appears just under the lotus that Saraswati is sitting on the left. And about 30 individual prints signed by this artist survive, depicting a range of subjects, sacred and secular. The artist has been almost totally unknown by art historians, but my collaborator, Mark Barron, who co-authored our catalog, has done a lot of work to show that he was very likely a key figure in the adoption of lithography as a tool for making a kind of new type of Kaligat painting that used lithography quite liberally, actually, to provide outlines, but also details, and then even shading and texture, sometimes providing kind of variation in the surface, and to suggest textured surfaces. Datta was also a skilled businessman. Here you can see two very similar prints of Shiva and Parvati. It seems likely that he printed works like these and then possibly sold them to other people to paint. So he could sell them unpainted, and then other people could add the color and sell it on their own. So he was really a professional, and made an impact that I think deserves a bit more attention. Then in the 1880s, we get presses beginning to emerge with formal names like Calcutta Jubilee Art Studio and Oriental Art Studio. And now we know very little actually about who ran these presses or who owned them. But they do have captions and text along the bottom, as I hope you can see here. So, for example, the work on the left, we know the name of the press, and we also know that they were based on Chitpur Road. What we're seeing by this period of the 1880s is the increasing use of lithography in more and more advanced ways to make these devotional images, and kind of a professionalization that comes along with that. And here I just wanted to take those two prints and show them to you next to Kaligat paintings to show you that these artists are still really rooted in that tradition, but they are using lithography to make various changes. They're able to increase production and lower the cost of the prints they make. And they're also using they're adding a lot more detail than it was ever possible to do with Kaligats because you had to paint them so quickly. Now they're able to add in kind of detailed backgrounds, and also they're using imported inks from Europe to add color in new ways. So, for example, the print on the right is hand painted except for the sky, which has been printed using what's called a rainbow roll, colors of ink blended on the roller. Now, other artists came to lithography along kind of a different route, more directly connected to the colonial, the British world, and the kind of European idea of art with a capital A, if you will. And one of these artists was Christohari Das or Krishna Hari Das. He was trained in lithography at the Government School of Art. And he worked for the British. He made lithographic illustrations for the Annals of the Royal Botanic Gardens and the Geological Survey of India. But he also made images of gods and goddesses, like you see here. And some of these were probably standalone prints, which were, potentially could be used in the home, could be used devotionally. And you can see here that he is relying on compositions that have a history in Kalighat painting, have a history in Calcutta, kind of the intertwined bodies of Krishna and Radha, for example. But he's using European techniques to suggest the depth around them. He's using detailed shading and modeling in order to make the gods appear really three-dimensional and give you the sense that they're really existing in a real space. And this type of work was done broadly or, in a kind of large scale by the Calcutta Art Studio, which opened in 1878. They are really famous for, again, trained at the Government School of Art, and they're really well known for taking stories like Annapurna, Krishna Kali, very Bengali stories, but almost refiguring them according to Western visual genres like history painting, and doing fully kind of three-dimensional illusionistic backgrounds and spaces with lots of textures and tones. They were certainly not the first to kind of combine elements of European art with Hindu iconography, but they did it because it was through lithography. They did it on a large scale that had an impact that arguably went further than what had come before. Now, by the mid 1880s, all of these presses were printing in full color, which means sometimes they were using 8 or more stones, each one printing a different layer of color. And the colors were transparent. You could see other colors through them, and so they were able to create these incredibly rich kind of color palettes on the page that appear to have just been irresistible to many people. They were greatly admired right away. I do want to mention that not everybody liked them. And here you can just glance over a couple of comments from Bengali elites from the late 19th and early 20th century who found these lithographic prints too garish and not naturalistic. There was that opinion as well. But basically, these prints were very popular and quickly adapted to use in cultural, in homes and communities. Our exhibition now turns to the use of prints in different social spaces. And I think it's interesting to think about how, even though when they were new, they had this very low value in the marketplace, these are not expensive. But as they circulate through marketplaces and art schools and into homes and communities, they kind of accrue more and more meaning. They sort of build up meaning, and they also increase in impact on the culture around them. Now, of course, one use is for puja. And I want to just quote a scholar of religion who's written about these prints. And he says, contemporary Hinduism is inconceivable without calendar icons. This is something that I think is probably not news to this audience, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But I do want to show you how we created a space in the exhibition where we tried to convey this to our Boston audiences. And here you can see a room where we have you see 2 pedestals in the foreground, but there actually are 4 facing inward. So it's almost like a little room within a room. And the pedestals combine printed lithographic images from Bengal with other objects. It's sort of intended to be the way you might set up a puja room or shelf with a mixture of objects acquired in different times and places. And then around the walls are framed prints with spaces where you can stand and listen to recordings of Bengali stories, poems, and music from the late 19th century. So the goal is really to convey or rather to kind of connect the lithographs to various different community-based kind of cultural practices that gave the lithographs meaning, and made them kind of resonate with the broader culture of the city in the 19th century. Now, in our final room that's focused on Calcutta prints, we focus on images of the goddesses. And you can see the design changes quite dramatically. We have a new wall color. The prints, you'll notice, are not leaning anymore in a kind of a casual way, but kind of they're all the same, and we have them kind of vertical. And I think what we were going for is kind of a sense of change, also maybe a sense of energy or even urgency. The highlight of this room is undoubtedly this famous print of the goddess Kali. It was made by the Calcutta Art Studio, and it's really rich in detail. It has these amazing billowing dark clouds behind the goddess and a strong sense of kind of drama and danger, which is actually very different than earlier prints of Kali that were made by this press. It is an advertisement for Kali cigarettes, and that is mentioned at the bottom. There's three products that are advertised, and the one in the center is Kali cigarettes. And so we have this devotional image, we have this advertising element, but then there's also another message here, another layer of meaning. On the right-hand side in the red Bengali text, we have this message. If you're invested in the development of indigenous industry, if you feel it's your duty to care for the poor native working people of your country, if you can really discern right from wrong, then, oh, Hindu brethren, use Kali cigarettes. Many of you may realize that this is really a Swadeshi message, kind of resonating with the Swadeshi movement to boycott British goods and use indigenous goods. And that movement really kind of formally starts in 1905. But this print, we believe, is from about 1890 to 1900. So kind of shows the emergence of this kind of new language of resistance. And it also sheds a different light on the image of Kali. So I would say in this print, in a work like this, we can see that the goddess is not just kind of receiving our devotion, but she's also sort of then becomes somebody who's leading those who know right from wrong. She is becoming kind of a leader of anti-colonial resistance. And this is something that is very clear in this print, but probably would have affected the way that people understood many other lithographs of goddesses in the 19th century, that show goddesses as kind of self-sacrificing, as fierce and, ready for battle, or even as nurturing mothers, because they too could be seen as related to the anti-colonial movement, in that case, more as kind of symbols of the nation and what the nation could and should be when independent. Now we finish our display of Calcutta prints with these 10 images. These are probably my favorites. They're some of the most beautiful of all of the early Calcutta lithographs. I just want to sort of emphasize that in their own time, these were for sale in the market. They have a copyright notice at the bottom. They are very much commodities for sale in the bazaar. But I think the artists have figured out how to also make them potent devotional objects. There's a quote from the period of these prints that say these images demand worship. And then again, we can see them as works of art that use a very skillful combination of iconography, Hindu iconography with lithographic technique and European techniques of kind of naturalism or illusionism. And then there's that additional layer of the prints helping to spread new political ideas and social ideas. So this multifaceted nature of the lithographs, the way they have all these different roles and features, is what first drew me into this subject, what excited me about them, and it continues to kind of amaze me, and it's something that I really wanted to convey in our show. In the last room of the exhibition, we leave Calcutta behind. this early period of printmaking that we've been looking at when Raja Ravi Varma hadn't even begun his press yet had been a time of incredible growth in Calcutta's print culture and Calcutta's culture generally. As I said, it was a period of artistic innovation and political mobilization, and also changes in Hinduism, the way that people imagined gods and goddesses. But at the same time, prints were beginning to be made in Pune, lithographs of divine figures. And soon after that, Mumbai and other centers began to produce lithographic prints of gods and goddesses. And over the 20th century, the volume and the speed of expansion of this kind of print world only increases. This is what inspired the final room of our exhibition, which you see here. And I would now like to invite my collaborator, Yousuf Saeed, to come on now and to share his thoughts about this room which we created together. And we can go back and forth a little bit, but Yousuf, I would love it if you would speak a little bit about your role in creating this room and the ideas behind it, what it meant to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Can everybody hear me? So I'm Yousuf Saeed, and we run this initiative called the Tasveer Ghar, the House of Pictures, where we are documenting popular visual culture, the calendar art, posters, cinema posters, and so on. So this really is a kind of a 20th century uh, proliferation of popular print and really very, very colorful culture. And we together we decided that this entire beautiful exhibition of the Calcutta prints should kind of end in a room where we display what was happening afterwards, what was happening in the print culture. So what we have done is that from the Tasveer Ghar collection, we have been digitizing various collections. We are not really a physical space. We are not a physical collection. We collect a lot of digital material. So we have been digitizing various collections. For example, Priya Paul collection. So Priya Paul is this entrepreneur and art collector based in Delhi and other cities, and she has been collecting a whole lot of this kind of bazaar art, which incorporates calendars, picture postcards, even sort of matchbox labels and cinema images and framed images, all kinds of things. So I am really, for the last few years, I have been into this. In fact, Tasveer Ghar is sort of completing 20 years now this year. So from the collection of Tasveer Ghar, we chose a whole lot of images, as you can see on this wall, and we kind of created a collage. We also incorporated a few videos in it, so you can see there are a few video kind of screens which are showing a couple of things. For example, they're showing how these posters are sold on the streets, especially around the festivals of Diwali or other festivals. So these posters are sold, and prior to that, how they are printed. So we've also got some videos of the printing presses, how these colorful images are coming out of the printing presses. So together we wanted to create a kind of a bazaar art feel. And that's what we tried to do. I mean, it would be really great if some of you could visit this place and see how how colorful this room looks like. And also I would invite you to visit our website tasveerghar.net or tasveergharindia.net. And we've been looking at documenting many of these images from different collections. In fact, we are right now trying to digitize a few more collections, and we're also interviewing the collectors, interviewing the scholars who have been doing this kind of work. And so we featured videos, we featured several visual essays written by art historians and cultural historians. So it's a very, vibrant kind of a space. And I really enjoyed creating these walls. Thanks a lot, Laura, for giving us the opportunity, and thanks MAP for conducting this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yousuf. Yeah, it was really incredible to be able to work with you on this final space, which people linger in, and kind of you can see after the exhibition, which is relatively spare, not too many objects in any one room. They come into this space and there's like a gasp. And so for me, it really helps, I think, draw the connection between the historical 19th century story and the present day, which is something that's really, really important for us in the sense that we want people to leave thinking differently about the world we all live in. So I guess we'll close there, and I just want to say thank you again to MAP, thank you to Yousuf, and other collaborators that I mentioned in the presentation who helped so much to put together this exhibition and the catalog. It's been an incredible experience for me. And yeah, come to Boston. But if not, let us know what your thoughts are or ask questions now. That would be wonderful. We would love to hear from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Yousuf, also. What an amazing, amazing presentation. It was such a treat to be able to see these works, and I'm sorry that we can't see it in person. And I can see there are a couple of questions from the audience. But before I get into that, I thought maybe I could start. I wanted to ask, you talked about how the material kind of fluency that lithographs offered, and the speed and the cost was attractive, right, to Kalighat painters when they were experimenting with this material. But do you think there was also a kind of new iconographic conventions that were created as a result of that, or was there a disruption in the way the kind of aesthetic iconography played out apart from the material ramifications?
Yeah, I mean, I do absolutely think that this is a period where there's sort of technological change and aesthetic change, particularly those artists that were kind of connected to the government school of art, who were really alongside lithography. They were learning about European painting and prints and single point perspective. And then those artists also, I think, because they were bringing something new to the marketplace, even other artists who hadn't necessarily had that training began to be impacted by it and pick up elements of that. So absolutely, there's a kind of adoption of sort of European style. And that's why I was saying in the beginning, the founder of the MFA's collection probably would have hated these lithographs, because the aesthetic does change dramatically, and changes in ways that show the adaptation to sort of some European norms and values.
Right. I also wanted to ask you to expand a little bit more about the place of lithographs in the anti-colonial movement, in the Swadeshi movement. Was it that was it a kind of informal transition, or was it sort of adopted formally by the nationalist movement in some way? Is part one. So, for example, the printing presses, were they themselves kind of symbols of Swadeshi enterprises in some sense? And did the movement actively commission or circulate particular images? And if yes, which ones were those? Or was it a kind of more informal relationship that over time kind of got normalized? If you could talk a little bit about that, and also a little bit more about the people that were making these, and whether there was a change, because obviously, painting and handmade was a kind of very particular skill. Was there a kind of democratization that happened as a result of lithography? And then who were those people that were being able to now produce that perhaps were not being able to do it earlier?
Yeah, so so to take the first question, you could see that in the Kali print that I shared that it's not, it's been issued by a druggist who's advertising his goods. So that's an example of it happening in a kind of really informal way. Um, and and that is what we see in this early period in Calcutta. But things do begin to change in the early 20th century, where I think you do see kind of a more, so you see, for example, the emergence of printed images of Bharat Mata. And that for more on that, I really recommend people seek out the writing of Sumati Ramaswamy, who has explored that in greater detail. Um, Also, in Pune, which was emerging as a print center at the same moment as Calcutta, from the very beginning, there is more explicit, more kind of consistent political imagery, and kind of revolutionary imagery. So, I think you see it a bit more formalized and explicit there. And again, just to suggest people seek out a book, there's Grafted Images by Holly Schaefer is a book that explores the some of the presses that emerged early on in Pune and those kinds of political prints. So you can get more there. And as to your other question, I mean, I think there has been, to me, it seems that there's been an emphasis on the artists in Calcutta, artists who were kind of middle class, maybe, and went to the government art school and picked up lithography, like the people who formed this famous press, Calcutta Art Studio. But they really don't seem to have been the only ones, and I would argue that maybe they weren't even the first. And that other artists who didn't have that formal art school training, but were maybe coming out of the Botala publishing world. So in northern Calcutta, this world of presses and printmakers who themselves came out of kind of metalworking. A lot of them seem to have come out of like silversmith, metalsmith trades because they were cutting type. And they were carving blocks to make these early publications from the 18 teens and 20s. So some of those folks clearly picked up lithography and came from it kind of more in the workshop, in the bazaar, training on the job rather than having this kind of gentleman style art education. So there's a variety of people working in lithography. And that I think makes it like kind of interesting. And as you said, democratizing, it was probably very expensive in the beginning to get access to a lithography press and import the stones and everything. But it seems over the course of this period to have gotten more accessible and more people were able to do it.
Right, yeah. And it's so interesting to see also the kind of legacy that it leaves because like we saw in the final room and in what Yousuf showed, it's kind of carried forward into popular culture that we see even today. We see it in political rallies, we see it in cinema hoardings and things like that, and it's so easily recognizable. So to be able to trace that back to this kind of movement is really incredible. Maybe I can take a couple of questions from the chat. There's a question from someone who has said that they've come across objects such as toys and jewelry from the early 20th century with similar devotional imagery. And could you share a little bit, if you know, how these images came to be used in objects as well?
I'm intrigued. I don't know that I've come across jewelry. The one thing that I could share is that certainly in this period, you get the same type of imagery made in porcelain. These wonderful, and I'm sure people have seen them because they have lasted even longer than the prints. So like porcelain objects made in Germany, and then eventually I think also made in Japan, which like a Durga image that you see in the print will be actually made in a three-dimensional kind of sculptural object made out of porcelain. So it doesn't surprise me that it went then from there further into other materials that could kind of render these images in 3D. Thank you
Someone
for the
else,
question.
yeah, perhaps whoever has asked this could mention what they've seen in more detail. But someone else has also mentioned that the fact that these lithographs came into people's homes and domestic spaces, did it, perhaps, maybe this is a question, did it open an intimate space for women at home to be able to worship in a way that they perhaps cannot, may not have been able to do outside of their home or locations in their villages and so on, if there's any kind of social repercussions of this artistic technique that you could speak?
I think that that's an exciting idea, and I have wondered about that too. Can we think of the kind of audience for these prints as being women to some extent? From what I understand, they were really, in the home, accessible by everybody. But the way that the prints come along with other kind of printed material, I mean, the Kali ad is a great example where you see the devotional with the kind of this advertising. But looking more broadly, these printed images were in almanacs, they were in magazines. And so I think we can think of this new print technology as bringing a lot more printed material into the home. And it's also a period where we see rising literacy among women. So I think these objects do, take part of a world in which women are getting more and more access to kind of images and ideas from outside the home. And you can see that very much. We didn't get into it today, but in kanta textiles, because the images that women are embroidering on the kanta textiles often come out of print culture. So I think it's very cool to think about how they were a window into the world.
Wonderful. I can see that we don't have much time left, but I wanted to actually ask you. Okay, we have one more question here. Is there a difference in what was happening in Calcutta versus Pune, since these were happening at the same time?
Yeah, I think they're very different. Very, very different. Different. They look different. The prints, the aesthetics are different. Which gods get depicted is different. Pune and Maharashtra has this strong relationship with Ganesh. So there's Ganesh images that are unique, and then political figures that are important to politics in that region appear in the lithographs very early on and often kind of depicted with some of these same kinds of, not the same as a divine figure in this point, but they're part of the mix really, really early on. So it's a unique story. It needs its own exhibition, which MAP should do in the next couple of years.
We would love that. I also wanted to ask, there's one more question about audiences, and I actually have a question about audiences as well, but maybe we can start with this. How does your audience in Boston, I assume that's what they mean, view the lithographs now? And perhaps audiences in general, as viewers, is there any kind of response that stands out to you that's memorable?
It's hard to boil it down. I think there's been there have been many different responses. I love doing tours because I see different things coming out each time. But I have enjoyed members of like the Indian diaspora in Boston coming in and saying, I've lived with these images my whole life, but I've never looked at them. I've never paid any attention to them. And so there's a kind of real interest in that community. And then, I had a visitor last week who was a printmaker and who found in the Calcutta prints in particular, he was really impressed by them as works of art in the way that the artists were using the kind of full potentiality of different types of marks and tones that you can make with lithography. And I think it's really interesting. One insight that he gave me was that when Raja Ravi Varma comes along and starts doing lithographs, the goal is really to give the impression of an oil painting. To make a print that looks like an oil painting. And so the Raja Ravi Varma prints don't do that, don't have that fine attention to what lithography can do. mark making and gradations of dark and light. They're very impressive. Those early Raja Ravi Verma prints are fantastic, but they're going for something different. And so that was fascinating to hear. And then in our final room, you can imagine our final room has brought lots of interesting reactions. Often people get very nostalgic in that space and recognize the Amitabh Bachchan and other other famous figures and familiar products that are advertised.
Sure. Okay, before we wrap up, I had another question about sort of maybe the was there any sort of tension between the fact that these were kind of easily mass reproducible sort of objects versus the kind of there's a certain kind of aura that sacred objects have, especially if they're made by hand, especially if the skill is located in only a few people or in a certain community. Was there some sort of tension between the fact that now this was kind of available very freely, especially from even, let's say, traditional religious institutions or kind of the custodians of religion in some sense, priests or temples? How did they respond to this kind of these mass-produced images entering, public spaces, festivals, domestic spaces as well? If you could speak a little bit to that.
I think it's a great question. I have not come across any, source that has suggested really how the kind of, the like the religious institutions responded, except religious institutions that used lithography. So, for example, there we have a print in the exhibition that seems to have been kind of issued by a follower of Vivekananda. So there we see kind of somebody who's actually kind of promoting the beliefs that, that Ramakrishna is, known for through lithography. But there may be more of a kind of dialogue and discourse back and forth about that. And I hope that future people kind of explore it in more detail. But I mean, by and large, one thing that I find really interesting in the literature about this material is that ever since Walter Benjamin, the scholar Walter Benjamin, in European and American art history, there has been this idea that the original work of art had a kind of magic and aura because it was the original, and that copies made, especially mechanically, mechanically reproduced, were slowly kind of losing that aura. And a scholar I admire, Stephen Inglis, who's written about prints and has done a lot of work in South India, I think, really looking at how people use prints. And he argues that that is just not operative, is not relevant in the Indian context, and that the idea of having many, many, many copies or many, many, identical prints, possibly just makes them even more potent because they kind of come to take on an authority. This is how Ganesha looks, or this is how Rama looks. And so certainly I think that idea of sort of a loss of power through reproduction is something that we need to kind of question, and not take for granted. So yeah, that's the best I can do. It's a really rich question that should be explored.
Okay, and a final question is more about the exhibition. If was there anything surprising that you found when you were doing your research for the exhibition? Any kind of fun story that you'd like to share? And also, was there any significant work or set of works or material that you think are gaps just because they're not easily available or they've been damaged, etc.? Anything that you think you wish you had and could have included?
That's a great question. So, one of the things that I didn't get to mention, that this is a great moment that I can do that, is that a challenge in putting together the show was figuring out a way to convey to audiences who are not familiar with South Asia, how prints like these exist in the urban landscape, that they're not just at home. Let me just make this stop making noise. I'm sorry, that they're not just in a museum, but that they're kind of people experience them day to day. And so I really struggled to figure out how to do that, how to convey that. and went through so many different ideas. And in the end, we were able to commission a filmmaker named Tanmay Chowdhury to make a 2-minute film that he shot in December in Kolkata. And the film is now on the web. So if you go to the exhibition webpage and scroll down, you can see it. And he did an incredible job at just showing, homes, streets, offices, and even factories, and showing kind of people living with prints. And that I think has been crucial for helping our visitors understand the material. So, but I can't tell you how late that came to, it was like we struggled for months to figure out how to put that together. And then at the very end, we found him. So I'm very grateful for that. Um, and then, maybe one thing just to say is that we at the MFA, we don't have a collection of Muslim devotional prints from South Asia. I wish we did. I would love to collect that kind of material. And so, as a result, and I think for good reason, we really focused on the Hindu imagery, and we were able to relate that also to our permanent collection of sculptures and paintings. But I'm very grateful to have been able to work with Yousuf and with Tasvirgar, because that last room shows you the multi-religious nature of South Asia. And that print doesn't just belong to, one community, it kind of cuts across. So that's a gap in the collection that I wish we could fill. And for this show, we filled it, using reproductions from Tasvirgar, but maybe in the future we'll have our own collection.
Great. Well, I hope so too. And I also hope that we can see a show on Muslim devotional imagery from South Asia as well.
Yeah.
But for now, I can see we have only 2 minutes left. So I want to thank you, Laura, for this wonderful presentation and for kickstarting our new series, A Closer Look. And thank you, Yousuf, also for joining us. I also want to acknowledge our ISL interpreters, Shivoy and Saurav, who have been interpreting live throughout this conversation. Thank you so much for your support. And thank you to all the attendees who took time out of their busy Thursday evenings to join us. I hope you all enjoyed this. And this is a monthly series that we're going to be having at MAP. Some will be online, some will be in person at the museum. So anyone who is around, please follow us on social media, follow our website, see what we're up to. We also have some exciting exhibitions on view at the moment, so we'd love to have you join us. And thank you once again, Laura and Yousuf, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.